Can everyone hear me okay? My name is Amanda. I'm a brand editor at Howl, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all today to Ben Callahan's session titled Building a Human-Centered Culture. Ben is both president of Sparkbox and founder of the Build Right workshop series. You can find him sharing his ideas about the web on the Sparkbox Foundry and other leading industry blogs. He notes that he's incredibly grateful for the team at Sparkbox as they pioneer new responsive web design techniques and continue to push for great user experiences outside the context of specific devices. And now please join me in welcoming Ben to How Design Live.
Thanks. About 9 years ago, I took a project with a few friends of mine. It's the very, very early stages of starting a web design company. And the customer was this amazing organization that did some really cool work in all parts of Africa. So they're about 99% of the folks who worked for them lived in Africa. And they were trying to provide just basic needs, food, shelter, water, clothing for folks who are in some desperate situations. And they kind of came to us because they had one or two folks who were in the States kind of helping manage things from there. And one of those folks was an older gentleman who had been with them for a long time, and he lived close to the Dayton area, which is where we're from. And so he kind of found out about us through a friend, and they needed a new website, and they had all these really cool ideas about what they wanted to do. All these folks all over Africa wanted to be able to tell the stories, and they had some really interesting challenges too, because bandwidth was a serious concern. A lot of the folks who would be referencing the content would be in a scenario where they don't have really solid internet connection. The types of devices were very different than the devices that we're used to here in the States. And so there were just some really cool challenges that we were really excited to tackle. And we kind of jumped in with both feet. We had this one gentleman in the States, like I mentioned, that was our kind of point of contact, and he'd been with them for a long time, so we really understood the organization. And he sat down with us, kind of walked through all the things that he thought they needed. We took some great notes, had some great conversations, and we really jumped in. And I would say it was about a 3 or 4 month project. And by the end of it, we were thrilled with the results, just super excited. We got it into production, and about a week later, we got a call from that same gentleman who we'd been working with this whole time. And he said, hey, so I finally had a chance to show this to the folks, the rest of the team. And I was just like, wait a second, you're telling me that nobody else has seen any of this yet? And so a couple minutes into the conversation, I realized what was happening. Basically, they didn't like it and they didn't want it. They'd already paid their bills. They were a great customer. This guy that we'd interacted with the whole time was just, we felt like it was a great experience. About a month later, that site was no longer online, and they had replaced it with basically what was a WordPress template with just a customized header image. And my team and I were just dumbfounded at this. We'd poured our hearts and souls into this thing. We felt like it was really good work. But I think what I realized, and the reason I tell that story is because I look back at that project as sort of this, just definitely a turning point for me as someone who's trying to create great experiences. And I realized that project, total failure for us, right? And the thing is, it wouldn't have gotten any better if we had been better designers, if we'd been better coders, right? If we had some new tool, some new JavaScript framework, none of that stuff would have fixed those problems. And I think for me, that was like this turning point where I realized that the projects that we have don't typically fail because of the technical stuff, right? We're smart. We can figure out the design challenges. We can figure out the development challenges. But those projects, they fail for other reasons. And I just, a week or two ago on Twitter, asked this question. I said, why have your web projects failed? Now, I'll give you this quick caveat too. I'm a web guy, so I feel a little bit out of place sometimes. Are there any web people here? Yeah, okay, you're my people, thank you. I like the rest of you too, but sometimes I feel a little out of place here. All these things that I'm going to talk about, the context is web design, but they apply, trust me, they apply to all of what we do, okay? So I asked this question: why have your web projects failed? And I just threw out a little Twitter poll. And I gave people, I was trying to give them some sort of unique answers to give, but I can only give 4. So I gave them 4 options. Option 1, a developer framework. Option 2, you or your team. Option 3, a design tool. And option 4, your boss or your stakeholders. And so after just about a day or so of kind of leaving that out for folks to respond to, I got some pretty telling answers. Basically, it's probably a little tricky to see here, but 100% of the folks chose the people reasons and 0% the technical reasons, right? And if you think back in your history of project work, and you think about if you can kind of zero in on a project that failed, I'm guessing if you think through the reasons, it probably didn't have much to do with CSS or Photoshop or whatever, right? It was more probably communication or misunderstanding, missed expectations. And I think one of the reasons this is so challenging is because there are just so many people involved in the work that we do these days, right? I mean, we have one project where we have a single individual. He's the whole company. It's his idea. He's the founder. He makes all the decisions. And you can contrast that with another project where we have a customer we're working with, where we have 50 UX and UI designers on their team that we're trying to work with, and hundreds of developers, you know? So literally hundreds of people. And that's just between us and our client. That doesn't even consider how many users that we need to think about, stakeholders, all those kinds of things. And now, this idea that our projects fail for people reasons and not for technical reasons kind of feels a little negative, and I'm an optimist. So I'm trying to kind of reframe that a little bit, and I thought maybe there's a more positive spin on that same idea. So I might suggest to you today, and what I hope to talk to you about this morning is this simple idea, that if we want to be better at our jobs, we got to start by being better humans. Now, our organizations and our cultures, our teams, we've got to be human-centered. And a human-centered culture is one, I believe, that assumes the underlying truth about all of us as individuals, which is that we're social animals. If you look back through all of human history, you don't find ancient civilizations where an individual lived on their own independent of other individuals, right? If you look back, you always find groups, cities, tribes, civilizations. And we do life together because that's kind of how we're wired, right? And all those things that we do them together. And that means we've got to figure out how to work better together. And so I believe that valuable collaboration has to be at the center or the core of a human-centered culture. Now, I want to spend some time talking about collaboration because I think it's so core to this idea of human-centered culture. But I want to be specific. I don't mean just any kind of collaboration. I mean the valuable kind, right? And I say that because there's so many organizations out there today that mistake getting along for collaborating. There's actually a really big difference between these, right? If you think about it, right, it's super easy to get along with folks that are just like you, but that doesn't really lead to much valuable collaboration. We're going to kind of unpack that a little bit. But for the type A folks, I wanted to give you a quick agenda. So we're going to have a little theory. I'm kind of this high-level thinker, so I don't get into the weeds a ton, but I am going to try to make this very practical for you too. And we're going to talk about investing in the people that you work with. And then I've got some next steps that we can use, hopefully, as you go back to your offices in the next week or so, that will help you to kind of build this sort of culture where you work. All right? Okay. So let's talk about the ingredients for valuable collaboration. In order to do this, I want to use 2 fairly famous collaborations as an example. All right, who's seen this? Yeah, right. Hard to forget it. Dumb and Dumber, okay. If I was going to give you a quick summary of this film, I would say 2 complete idiots bumble their way through a road trip, fight over the love of a woman, somehow manage to survive. That's pretty much the entire film. Well, I probably shouldn't call it a film. That's pretty much the entire movie wrapped up in a sentence, okay? Not a lot of stuff that we can pull from this that has, long-term value, but it's going to be a really good baseline for us to compare against, okay? Now, who's seen this one? Okay, Moana, right? I have a 7-year-old daughter who's a little bit obsessed with this film, so I think I've seen it probably 30 times now. And if I was going to give you a summary of this, I would say two very different characters, Moana on the left and Maui on the right, who initially dislike each other because of their differences, are able to eventually realize they need each other to accomplish something that neither could do on their own. Now, don't worry if you haven't seen this film, because this is super common, right? Every romantic comedy, when they start, the two folks who they're going to end up together, they just hate each other at the beginning, right? And you can just kind of see it all unfold. Every adventure film starts with some gung-ho, crazy guy or lady who thinks they can solve all the problems. Somehow they're asked to take this person with them. Of course, they have to drag them along. And then, of course, that person becomes invaluable to the mission, right? So this is really common. And it's common because it's very true, okay? So let's break these two down just very quickly, and we'll kind of use that as a model. Okay, so Dumb and Dumber. In the case of Dumb and Dumber, we have Harry and Lloyd. At the very beginning of the film, they're best friends. But they're best friends essentially because they're identical. They're kind of like the exact same idiot, right? Now, if you just kind of follow that film through, that movie through, there's a little sequence in there where they kind of go their separate ways. They're kind of angry with each other. And they pretty quickly realize they're not going to be able to survive without each other. And by the end of the movie, they're best friends again, and they're still kind of exactly the same as they were at the beginning, right? Now, if we look at Moana, at the beginning of the film, these two actually hate each other. And they hate each other because they have such different perspectives on how to tackle the challenges before them. Now, over the course of the film, they're forced to struggle together. And that process we're going to talk a little bit about. It's an important part of this. But by the end, I would actually consider them respectful collaborators. They're able to accomplish some things that really neither of them could have accomplished on their own. So from this little example, we can kind of pull out two key ingredients. The first of which is this idea of a diversity of perspective. Now, I love events like this because what happens is you start to see these little themes emerge, right? How many of you saw the keynote from Timothy Goodman? All right, this look familiar? He said, if you're a white guy with an audience and you're not talking about privilege, you are missing it, right? And then just a little bit last night, Helen from Procter & Gamble, we need different ways of thinking, right? And then Malcolm Gladwell, just yesterday, he said diversity can mean so many different things. And so like Malcolm shared, I totally agree with what he suggested, which is that there's a lot of different ways to break that up. What I'm talking about is this idea of diversity of perspective. Folks who come to a problem with a different set of expectations, different set of experiences, a different perspective. Now, obviously, this is not new, right? Like any study, if you go look at any study on how to be more effective in the workplace, and there's a handful of them here for you, it always turns out that more diversity means better results. Just every time. That's what every single study concludes. But I'm a visual thinker, so I want to try to, you're going to learn this about me very quickly. I like to sort of see things, how they actually kind of come together. So I charted this out for us, right? Super simple. I would say that as the diversity of perspective on a team increases, the potential for valuable collaboration increases, all right? The thing is that we need different life experience. We need different genders, different ages, races, points of view. In fact, we need dissenting points of view, right? If you think about it like this, if all of the folks on your team have the same perspective, when you give them a problem, if you ask them to collaborate, you're going to put 3 or 4 people on that problem. Because they have that same perspective, the results they come up with are not that different than one of them could have come up with on their own. So it's that friction of different ideas, those dissenting views, which allows us to think outside of that norm, right? That's something I think we could all agree with. Now, the second ingredient is empathy. And empathy is thrown around at events like this a lot. And many times I think we use it in the context of talking about our customers or their users. In the web, we're always talking about the user, right? What is the user? What's their experience going to be? And empathy in that context means I want to put myself in the position of that user, and I want to apply the things that I can gain from that perspective to the work that I'm doing. But that's actually not the kind of empathy that I'm talking about here. I'm talking about empathy for your peers, the folks that you have to work with. Now, you remember in Moana how I said they started out hating each other, but they were forced to work together, right? That process, that sort of forcing folks to sit together, solve a problem together, that actually is a process that develops empathy in an individual. So if I was going to chart this one out, it would look something kind of like this. As empathy increases, the ease of collaboration increases. Okay, so we're not talking about the value here, we're talking about making it easier to collaborate. If you think about empathy as your ability to see a situation from someone else's perspective, and you're surrounded by a bunch of people who have different perspectives, then empathy becomes the grease for collaboration, right? Kind of allows you to see the challenge from someone else's point of view. So now, continuing on my charting and graphing adventure here, I want to put these two together very quickly. I'm going to walk through this really quickly, and I want you to think about the teams that you're working on. When you go back to the office on Monday, who are you going to sit in the conference room with? Who are you going to be on that call with, right? And put yourself in that situation and think through these different quadrants. So we have diversity of perspective increasing from left to right. We have empathy increasing from bottom to top. And if you think about this, it's kind of simple to see. The left side of this graph is really, there's not a lot of value in collaborating, right? Because we don't have much diversity of perspective. A lot of the ways that we're approaching those problems is similar. The potential for high value in collaboration is pretty low here. But the right side's the opposite. That's where we have the possibility for there to be really great value, very unique solutions. Now, if we chart empathy out on this, it's a little different, and you'll remember that we talked about this idea of the ease of collaboration, right? But what's interesting about this is that in order for there to be good, valuable collaboration, there's got to be conflict, okay? And the type of conflict can be, because there's a lot of different types of conflict that you can have, and empathy allows us to shift. So with a lack of empathy, we have a focus on our personal differences, right? That's the kind of conflict that we're seeing. So I don't want to hear from somebody because they're different from me, and I'm focused on our differences. Whereas as empathy can increase, we can reach a point where we have this idea that there's conflict around the ideas, not around the individuals, right? That's actually healthy. That's the kind of conflict we want. So when we look at these quadrants now, in that top left, this is a scenario where we've got not a lot of diversity, but we do have a lot of empathy. And this is sort of a scenario where there's indifference, is what I would say. There's not a lot of conflict because there isn't much diversity of perspective. It's okay to be different, but nobody is, right? We continue down, bottom left here. I would say this is a quadrant of conformity. There's not much empathy, and so people strongly question any deviation from that norm. Even if you have a few folks with some unique perspectives here, you probably don't know it, right? Because they're kind of just fitting in. The bottom right is a quadrant I would call fear to differ. And if there are diverse perspectives here, well, there are diverse perspectives here, sorry, but nobody's willing to hear another side. It's not worth sharing those ideas because you're just going to get shot down. And then finally, that top right quadrant is courage to speak. And this is where the best solutions emerge. This is where dissenting views are actually encouraged, right? So I want to pause just briefly and let you look at this and think about your context. Where is your team? Where are you operating now? And now we can kind of look at the two examples, those famous collaborators, right? Harry and Lloyd and Maui and Moana. And let's just drop them in here really quickly. So I would say Dumb and Dumber, they kind of started in that bottom left quadrant, right? Over the course of the movie, they maybe moved up a little, they had a little struggle together, fighting over a woman, and eventually they sort of, maybe they have a little more empathy, but there's not a lot that's changed for them, right? If you contrast that with Moana, and I don't want to spoil the film, but at the beginning of the movie, they actually start in this sort of bottom left quadrant, and Moana lives with her people on this island. There's some challenging things happening there, but pretty much everybody she lives with, they just kind of want to keep doing things the way they've always done them, right? Not a lot of diversity of perspective there. She is pretty quickly thrust into a scenario where she's introduced to this guy, Maui. And these two do not hit it off well, right? So she's sort of instantly in this bottom right quadrant where there's two very different perspectives, but they don't really have much empathy for each other. And over the course of that movie, it's about them slowly understanding each other. It's about them figuring out that, hey, you know what? This person does have some valuable ideas. And it's fascinating to think about that shift from the personal conflict to the idea conflict. You can just watch it happen in that movie. It's really kind of neat to see. So what we're going for here is this simple idea that a team can actually own an idea. And this is incredibly powerful. If you think about a scenario where an individual owns an idea, that means in order to help evolve that, people have to ask permission to do something, right? And in the end, that individual is sort of ultimately responsible for the thing, being successful or failing. In the scenario where a team owns an idea, everybody owns that success, but they also own that failure, right? Accountability there. And there's no need to ask, right? People can jump in. They don't need permission to improve a thing. So this is really what we're going for. So that's my theoretical stuff for you. I want to talk a little bit about what this looks like, right? How does this translate to our cultures? And I've titled this section Investing in Your Humans because you remember this statement, right? If we want to be better at our jobs, we need to be better humans. So how do we become better humans, or how do we help each other become better humans? I want to just quickly think about sort of 3 tiers of how you can invest. And I'm going to give you a bunch of examples of things that can kind of play out in your culture, in your workplace, that will help you invest at sort of 3 different levels in an individual. And as we go through this, I would love for you to think not about the teams that you're working with, but about an individual, right? Somebody on your team that you may be able to invest in some way. So the first way is this idea of investing in a skill. The second is a simple idea of investing in the person. And the third is investing in a life. I'm going to give you just a few examples of each. Some of these things, especially this first column on the left, these are very common things, right? A lot of organizations have programs or things that will like help support you. And what's going on here is that an organization hires an individual, and they see that person that they've hired can add value in some way, and it's usually like a little sliver of their brain that they need, right? Like, I need you because you are really good at design. I need you because you're a great UX thinker. I need you because you can write amazing JavaScript, right? These are the things that we see in an individual when we're hiring, and so it's simple to invest in them, to give them an education budget, and that means here's some money for you to spend throughout the year, get better at JavaScript, get better at design, right? A lot of folks will encourage writing and speaking. This is something that we're convinced makes you smarter. If you can spend some time writing, right? Give your employees, give your teammates time to write about the things they're learning. It cements that knowledge in a very unique way. If you're asked to teach or speak about a topic, you're going to go research that topic, right? Because people may be asking you questions. It makes you smarter. Things like lunch and learns or meetups, right? Where there's just simple, inexpensive ways to try and get folks invested in getting better at a specific skill set. At Sparkbox, we have a little lunch and learn robot that lives in our Slack channels. So throughout about 2 weeks, I think we do them every other week on a Wednesday, but throughout the week, you'll see people like using these little commands in Slack to say, hey, Lunchbot, remember that we want to learn about this thing. And then, 2 weeks goes by and we've got half a dozen things thrown in there. Wednesday, people bring some lunch in, and then we're like, hey, Lunchbot, what are we supposed to talk about? And then all of a sudden, people are just called out. Maybe 2 minutes, you got to remember to tell us about that thing you did, or you got maybe 10 minutes. But it's super informal. It's just an easy opportunity for us to kind of help each other get better. So that's investing in a skill, right? Very focused on the thing that you do for a living. Sorry, I forgot one. The Maker Series this is something that we do as well. We realize how expensive it is to bring a big team to an event like this. So we said, what if we talk to some speakers and have them come to us and spend a day with us? So we have a series called the Maker Series, where we just invite folks to come in, spend a day with our team, and that helps us really get better at our craft. Okay, so investing in the person, right? This is a little different. This is thinking about not just the skill set that they have, but them as an individual. So the things that they're passionate about, the things they do, maybe when they're not necessarily with you. For us, this started with an idea of wellness. This is a big thing these days in corporate culture too, a wellness budget of some kind. This is a thing that it's like a matching budget for us, so folks can choose to use that on anything that will help them get stronger, help them sleep better, or help them eat better. And those three things kind of make up how we could have sort of see wellness. We also have, when somebody starts, we put them through this holistic training experience, right? This is where they are going to get 10 sessions with a personal trainer. Because to be honest, when I first started to try and think, I need to do something, I'm 40 years old now, and I need to start doing something, right, to stay healthy. I was kind of afraid to go into a gym, I didn't know what to do in there. And so I needed somebody to sit with me and say, hey, here's how you do this. There's these major movements. So we found that so valuable that we thought people need to know this to be healthy in their life, right? And if our employees are strong, if they're sleeping well, if they're eating well, they're going to be so much better at their jobs, So that made a lot of sense for us. That comes with some coaching as well on sleep and diet. And then peer review. This is a huge deal for us. And when we first started to do a real in-depth peer review process, I thought that I thought this would be in that first column, right? This would be an opportunity for folks to get better at their skills. But it actually has turned into a lot more than that. It's helped us thicken our skin. It's helped us figure out how to offer each other valuable critique and how to receive that. It's been invaluable to us as a team. And each time we do it, we do a big process every 6 months. Each time we do it, it gets a little bit more critical, right? And folks are just slowly adding layers to their skin, It's really been neat to see. And then we have a little program called the Threshold of Empathy, which is so simple. It costs us nothing to do. The idea is that there's all kinds of different roles inside of an organization. And when we hire somebody, typically we say, hey, you're that dev or you're that designer, and you're going to focus on that thing. But there's a lot of things that happen inside of an organization that most of us never get a chance to see. And so we created a very simple little spreadsheet, all of our employees down one side, and all these tasks across the top that are things they wouldn't typically get to do, like write an estimate, or sit in on a client call, or just a bunch of things, review a contract. Just a bunch of stuff that doesn't take a ton of time, but it's super insightful for somebody to start to understand how these other parts of a company work. And so we have this little spreadsheet we can just kind of check off, who's had the chance to do what. And having that document means we can sort of track and see who have we had, participate in a thing that isn't normal to what they do every day. That's been really insightful for our folks. I'll say this too, I'm sharing a bunch of examples from my company, and I'm not here to talk to you about Sparkbox, but that's the context that I work within, so I don't really have a lot of other context to offer you insights from, so I hope that's all right. And this final one is investing in a life. We have a simple little program called Travel Pizza where, let me tell you about investing in a life first. What I mean by this is that what we ask of our employees to be with us for 8 hours a day in the office, all the things that we're asking, there are implications outside of work for them, right? That 8 hours is 8 hours that they're away from their family. They may have a significant other, they may have children, they may have friends. And so for us to pretend like the things that we ask of our folks doesn't have an implication outside of their life with us is just, it's not smart. So what we're trying to do is look for opportunities to say, how can we invest in you and all of the things that surround what you do too? And so Travel Pizza is a simple example where, because I'm here now and speaking with you, I have a wife and I have 2 little kiddos at home. And so this week, while I've been gone, somebody from my office called my wife and said, hey, we know Ben's gone. is there an evening this week that we can buy you guys pizza? And it's like $20 to do that, you know? But that makes such a big impact on her week, you know, being there without me to help. So things like that, super simple to do, but it's an investment in the life and in the entire sort of surroundings of that individual. Another simple one, vacation bonus. So for us, we want folks to actually leave when they go on vacation. You know, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's a lot of people who have like unlimited vacation, and of course nobody goes on vacation, right? That's because we love what we do. That's great, but we need to get away. We need to recharge. So we decided, this is a little bit of a test phase, we decided that if you will give us a month's notice and you'll go away for at least 5 days, so 5 days in a row, and you'll tell us a month ahead of time, we'll add $500 to your paycheck to go on vacation, right? And what we're doing is we're trying to say, hey, you know what? Get out of here, get recharged, and then come back ready to really do your work well, right? That 1 month advance is huge for us because we're trying to plan out our schedules and like think about how folks are assigned to projects. So that gives us a lot of advanced warning too. So it's very helpful. We've been working through kind of just slowly, my business partner and I, trying to take with our significant others, our employees, just, you know, with their significant other out to a nice dinner sometime. So just a chance for us to get to know that other individual in their life and to tell them that we're grateful for the time we have with them. And then I would just say food. I mean, you probably know this, but there's something really magical about food. It has this incredible power to just break down those walls. For us, food is a huge part of our culture, and my partner Rob has called that a canary to our culture. And what we mean by that is that you get 1 hour each day, right, to choose to go somewhere else. And if you're choosing to do that with the people you work with, it means you're not going to be afraid to sit down with them and have those harder conversations, right? So food is a huge deal for us. We cook every Friday. We have a full kitchen. We love to cook. We love to eat. We don't really love to clean up, but we do that, and we invite our clients to come in, and we invite our families, kids come in, and sometimes it's an absolute mess and incredibly hectic, but it's also really cool for me to get to know these people, right? So that's a big deal. We do a Thanksgiving feast, and we do Halfsgiving as kind of like a warm-up halfway through the year to get ready for the feast. It's pretty fun. So now, if you were to ask the individuals on your team about the culture where you work, they would probably list a bunch of things like this, right? As folks who work inside of an organization, these are the kinds of things that we think about when you ask us about culture. But you have to know that these things are not your culture, right? Culture is a little bit less simple than that. You can't just do these things, right? Culture starts with values. And so each of these little columns, right? Each of these kinds of things that we do, these are all centered on some value that we have as an organization. So if you're thinking about this and you're taking down notes and you're saying, oh, we should buy pizza for folks when they, for their families when they travel, that might work for you, but that also may come across as incredibly inauthentic in your culture, right? What's important is for you to go back and understand what are the things that you believe as an organization. What are your values? And if you can identify those, then you can start to hang these little programs, these little benefits on those hooks, those values hooks, okay? That's how this will feel authentic in your context. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So these three ideas, investing in a skill set, investing in a person, investing in a life, these are the things that we do to help develop empathy in our people. These are the things that we do to create an inclusive environment so that folks with different perspectives will feel welcome there. But there's a ripple effect with these. Investing in a life is investing in a person, right? Investing in a person does make them better at their craft. So all of these things, they're very intertwined. And these things, the best thing about this is that they start to happen organically. in Slack, maybe like a month ago, 2 months ago, it's like people were starting to think about their summer projects, and somebody had just bought a house, and the house they bought had kind of a terrible deck, and the deck needed resurfaced, and so in Slack, this little Google Doc pops up, and it was like the summer projects Google Doc, and I was like, what is this, you know? So I popped this thing open, and this young developer on our team, Casey, had put down a row for each Saturday in the summer. And she picked one where she wanted to have some work done on her deck. She said, I need my deck refinished, you know? And then she said, but I can also help on these other Saturdays. And so then folks were like, oh, I got projects around my house. So they started to put their names in and their projects. And we had nothing to do with that, right? That comes from this idea of community that we have as a value. We want to take care of each other. And that's what I love, to see those things starting to happen organically. So Moana and Maui demonstrated for us how to increase empathy, right? They were forced to struggle through a thing. But I would tell you this, there's no simple step for increasing the diversity of perspective on your team. It's an incredibly long journey, and it starts with every individual. I would be more than happy to talk to you about my personal journey there, and I'll give you just a couple things that might help spur that for you. I read this book. Has anybody read this? On the Run, Fugitive Life in an American City by Alice Goffman. This young woman lived downtown Philly and writes about her experiences there, kind of getting to know over like 5 or 6 years, getting to know some of these folks in this community. And it is an eye-opening book. And this kind of happened to me because I live in this little town in Ohio. I'm walking down the sidewalk, holding hands with both my kids, you know. It's like a nice day out. You can hear the birds. And we were walking up to a crosswalk, and a police officer pulls up. And my kids are like, hi. And he leans over, and he's like, hi, you know. And I was like, in the middle of reading this book, where they're talking about how young African-American boys are learning how to run from the police at like age 7, you know. And it just made me realize there's a very different perspective out there. So I would encourage you to read something like this, you know. If you haven't taken these implicit bias tests, this is free. It'll take an hour, sit down and run through a few of these. If you just search for Harvard implicit bias, you'll find these. They will make you seriously question who you are as an individual and make you examine the biases that we all have. Okay? These are the kinds of things you have to do to start down the path of understanding what it means to have a more diverse perspective on your team. So what do we do next? Just a couple thoughts as I wrap up here. I would encourage you to hire the whole person. What I mean by that is that the work parts of a person, the parts that you need to do your job, are not separate from the other parts of that person, right? In fact, if you try to separate them, you're missing out on the real value of the folks that you have on your team. It's all the other stuff that they bring to the job that gives them something unique, that gives them a different way of thinking about how to solve a problem. Those parts are more valuable to you than their specific skill set. So please, when you make a hiring decision, think about that. I would encourage you to be really vocal about your values in the hiring process, because what you'll see is that folks who align with those values will be attracted to your organization. And folks who don't, they won't even apply, right? Same thing works with customers, if you're vocal about those values. I would encourage you to share a meal, right? You may not be in a situation where you can determine that there's a pizza travel program, right? That may not be, you may not have the authority to do that. But every single person here has the authority to ask someone to go to lunch, right? Or to see that someone's really busy at work and recognize that's impacting them at home and to take a meal over. It doesn't take much to do that. Like I said, there's something incredibly powerful about food. There's a great presentation from Leslie Miley. I think he's the former director of engineering at Slack. This is from Tech Inclusion last year. He said, when you go to cities that have diverse populations, you can hire people who are diverse because that's who's in the community. Then those people will come back to your headquarters and hire people who look like them because that's who's in their networks. This is deceptively simple. His idea is that if you want to increase the diversity of your team, invest in communities with unique perspectives. I think about, I look back at my history of trying to do this and failing, and I see we've invested in communities of people just like me, And so step back, find some unique communities with unique perspectives and start to invest there. This can play out in a lot of different ways. There are Girl Develop It chapters all over this country. Find a local Girl Develop It chapter and let them use your event space, let them use your office, just help them in whatever way you can. There's lots of other ways. I would encourage you to expose disagreement, don't hide it. Right? A lot of organizations are afraid of disagreement. That feels like unrest. And that disagreement, that's the material that you need to make really good, very unique discoveries and solutions. So don't hide that, expose that. We have a little Slack channel called Awesomeness, and you can kind of imagine what it's for. Basically, if somebody does something awesome, then someone can call them out in there and say thanks. But I, as sort of a leader in our organization, have started to be super intentional about looking for examples where an individual had a dissenting view, right? And they were willing to speak up about it and share it with the team, and calling them out for that. And that doesn't always result in, it's not like we're always going to choose that dissenting opinion, but a lot of times that dissenting view makes us think about it differently, which leads us to a better result. So having an environment where that kind of bravery is encouraged is super critical. I would say, too, encourage participation from those who are less outspoken. Right? It's actually your job to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. Don't think because someone isn't speaking up that they don't have an opinion. That is not true. I'll also say this sort of in conjunction. A lot of times, it doesn't take much. Sometimes you just need to speak a little less and listen a little more, right? And I'll just close with this thought that we are a scrappy bunch, right? Especially in the web industry, it's so young, it's 20, 25, 30 years old, right? But a lot of us have come to design or come to development from very different backgrounds. And we have English majors, we have biology majors, we have folks who didn't go to college, we have art school graduates, computer science, all of those folks coexist. And that is one form of a diversity of perspective that we're lucky to have in this industry, right? People come to it from a lot of different ways, a lot of different experiences. So we cannot let that go. We've got to hold on to that. There's a lot of really great programs out there, but I think as Jeffrey Zeldman mentioned this, these boot camps and things, but they're going to start pumping young minds into this industry with very similar approaches to problems. And we have to find ways to get them in and sort of invest in them holistically so they can bring the other parts of their life into the problem solving they do at work. And just one final thought, that our greatest threat to valuable collaboration is our lack of diversity. This is a problem that we've got to tackle head on, all right? I would encourage you, if you can realize that losing your ego, allowing your teams to own an idea, that produces better work. If we can do that as an industry, we're going to be well on our way to more valuable collaborations. Thank you. I've got a signal that we have a few minutes. If there are questions, I'm happy to chat. I also have a few T-shirts and things to give away. So any questions? Yeah, hi. So the question is, in the quadrants, seeing sort of empathy as a required part of the ingredients, how do you encourage that if you're not getting it? So to start with, to step back from the question, I would say when you're hiring, that's got to be something you're thinking about. But if you're in a situation now where you've already got a team and you feel like that's a missing ingredient, The kinds of things that I talked about around food are actually really valuable there, right? Getting to know somebody on a personal level outside of the context of your disagreements in work is actually really, really helpful. Have you guys seen the new, is it Heineken commercial that came out? I think it was Heineken, right? So if you watch that commercial, it's brilliant. I love this thing. But what happens is they actually have them do some stuff together, right? Like they just have them answer a couple simple questions. Then they have them put together like some IKEA furniture or something. Did you see this, right? And so like that process, right, of them solving a problem, but not a super complex problem. There's a set of instructions to follow. That whole process, those kinds of activities actually help them develop some empathy for each other. And then they show them the little clips of each other saying some pretty terrible things, right? And all of a sudden, they're actually willing to sit down and have a drink together. So I think the challenge is getting to know those individuals, doing some things that don't sort of force the tension first, but then allowing them to kind of work up to solving those more complex problems. Sometimes you have to take the first step, right? There's probably a lot of other answers there too, but Anita, hi.
I have a question. It's very, I think it's kind of on the news, but how do you enforce that into boxes and publication? So how do you get rid of over distance?
Yes. So the question is about remote teams, yeah? Yeah, that's a really good question. For us, like I said, food has been a huge deal. So that's difficult to do. We have a tiny office now in Pittsburgh. So we're trying to work through those things. What's been helpful for us is remembering that, so we have just shy of 30 people, 26 or 25 are in Dayton. And I would say that we're actually a more remote team than it seems, because pretty much all those people will work from home 1 or 2 days a week. And working from home in Dayton is just as remote as working in Pittsburgh, right? I'm not there physically. So we have to address that. I think because of that, we sort of have now, it's pretty normal that every single thing that we do happens online. Slack has been a huge deal for us there, just kind of putting some work into getting a communication tool set up to do more than just communicate about projects. People I've heard of having water cooler channels, things like that, where stuff can happen. We have a ton of channels that are just like fun things to do, or like, of course, random, but stay out of random if you can. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in there. We have a daily QT, which is where you can post pictures of your kids, right? It's opt-in, so it's like I'm tired of seeing the kid pictures. But I feel like those kinds of things, right? Getting folks together a few times a year is a huge help. We try to do that as often as we can. Anytime somebody wants to come to Dayton, we'll figure that out. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah. Hi.
So, in the position of, let's say, a startup, I would say inclusivity is a huge part of empathy. When, let's say, there's small meetings between marketing directors and the CEOs of the company when they're trying to solve a solution, how would you, I guess, talk about bringing in people, which is such a small team, to be able to look at it from all different perspectives as opposed to just looking at it from the same perspective they've always been looking at?
So the question is about, startups specifically, and you said something about having small meetings where only 1 or 2 folks are there. And so you're saying there's a lot of meetings where those decisions are being made without people participating.
With the same people over and over again.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are creating the work, let's say, for example, for those meetings,
Yeah.
aren't really included.
They got to be in the meeting. Yeah, and so this is where it may not, if you're not one of those 2 people who are having the meetings making the decisions, you may have a hard time getting that to happen, right? Have you suggested that those meetings are open up to more folks? Yeah. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe somebody here has some experience where they've been in that and found a way to help increase that, but is being as vocal as you can without being disrespectful about how this is needed for you to have input. I think sometimes, kind of following the direction that's set and showing that there could have been a better solution if we had more input. Sometimes something like that can help. Hi.
So opposite that, when you're in a large, huge org of a company,
Yeah.
and you actually have really good culture on your team,
Yeah.
how do you kind of guard and shield that from maybe the more toxic culture?
Ooh.
outside of-
Wow. Okay. So, what's your name? Amy's on a team in a large Borg organization, I think she said. And she has a small group that's got a great culture, but outside of that, she's trying to figure out how does she protect that from the corporate culture. I would say don't. Like, what needs to happen is they need to see how amazing that is, and that needs to spread, right? So if you're protecting it, you're keeping them from, stopping it, but you're also keeping them from seeing how valuable it is. I don't know what that looks like in your specific situation, but finding ways to kind of share that up, to say, look, here's the things that we're doing, and here's the amazing results we're getting, that could be like dramatically impactful for the whole organization. Yeah. Hi. So the question was the ideas around collaboration, did those come from the top down or were they more organic? So I was a computer science major. So when we started Sparkbox, I was just writing code all day, and over the course of the last 10 years or so, I've slowly transitioned out of doing that. And so now my focus is purely on Sparkbox as a company. But I would say that all these thoughts have evolved organically from the folks, because that's kind of who I am. I was just a coder. So yeah, I mean, I feel like there's not a lot that happens top down, at least in my context. So yeah. Anything else? Hi. Can we have? Oh. How can this apply to people with? How can this be applied to folks with disabilities? So thank you for signing as well today. This has been incredible to have. Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like it actually applies very well because we want an environment that's inclusive, right? We want to invest in the whole person regardless of their situation physically. And so anything that we can do in the context of working with a team in general would apply. Is there something specific, like a specific challenge you've experienced that we could apply it to? Putting her on the spot. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the idea of just making sure that we're conscious of those folks and being a place that is inclusive, as you kind of suggested. I was, in the web world, we talk about accessibility a lot. And I always think, like the other day we were coming out here and one of these escalators was not on, but totally works, right? Like that's a beautiful idea of like an enhancement where an escalator, generally you just stand on it and you ride down, but if it breaks, it doesn't break, it turns into steps, Whereas an elevator, like that's another approach, but if it breaks, you're stuck, right? So thinking about the way you solve problems as enhancements to existing solutions can be a really good way to be more inclusive, to be more accessible. Good? Thank you all so much. I'll be around for a few minutes. Come grab a t-shirt, okay? Thank you.